Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Haunted Victorian, where I recount true paranormal experiences that happened to me and my family in an old haunted house in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. If this is your first time joining us, I'll be sure to leave all of the other episodes linked down below so you can go back and listen to the story from the beginning. And on this episode, I would like to tell you the continuing story, part 3. So in the last episode, I had recounted a lot of the things that started happening in the house that I decided to move into with my boyfriend at the time, who later became my husband. And things started out very slowly, just, the normal kind of faucets being turned on and off, toilets flushing, footsteps, seeing things out of the corner of your eye. But over time, that activity started to really pick up to the point where it was causing fights in the house. We had his brother who came down the stairs one morning and announced that this house is effed and ran out the door, slammed the door. And although that he continued to live there, he never ever told me anyway what he experienced that day. So unfortunately, this was my ex-husband and I who were living together. I was still very young when we moved into this house. I was only 19 years old. And it wasn't the best relationship right from the get-go, but like I said in the last episode, you stick together because you love someone and you're hoping that things are going to get better. And I had kind of resolved to the fact that, this is my situation, I made my bed, now I have to lie in it. And after a while, things started to get really scary in the house. So all of the paranormal activity, or most of the paranormal activity that I experienced growing up, what I had experienced in other places, at my brother's house, when we first moved into this house, it wasn't scary, really. I did get freaked out from time to time, or certain events would be scary, but what we started experiencing in this house at this time caused me to not even want to live there anymore. I didn't want to stay there. It was a negative entity, and what I felt like didn't have any protections. So like I said in the last episode, we had kind of two different situations going on in the house. So we had something that was negative, but it was kind of off in the distance. It was in the background and you could kind of tell it was there, and it would come through every now and again. But for the most part, the experiences that we had in the house were pretty benign. We had a protective spirit there. His name was Joe, and he kept everything fairly quiet and calm as much as he could, and kept this negative entity at bay. And at first I had no idea what this negativity was. I didn't know if it was a demon. I didn't know what was going on, but after a while, and after we moved out kind of several years later, I did figure out what was going on. And I will share with you my theory, but at the time, so when all of this was going on, I didn't know kind of what the situation was. So my ex-husband, unfortunately, was a very heavy drinker, and when he would drink a lot, it was kind of like soap suds in his mouth and everything would just fall out. He would not treat me very well, and he would say things that were just kind of dumb, and he was very immature. Now, my ex-husband also kind of pretended that he was a skeptic. He went into that home as a very severe skeptic. He didn't believe in any of that stuff, but he, after a while, started having experiences of his own, and sometimes he would talk about it, but then other times he would say, no, it was the wind, or it's squirrels in the attic, or whatever the case was. And I think that was his way of dealing with it, and I think he thought if I ignore it that it's going to go away. But unfortunately that wasn't the case, of course. So he knew that I believed that there was a protective spirit in the house named Joe, and unfortunately one night when he had had too much to drink, he was being very immature, and he actually started saying out loud that, Joe, if you're here, we don't want you here. You need to pass over. We don't want you in the house, and all of this kind of stuff, and you don't exist, and everything else. And he was kind of making fun of the whole situation. But unfortunately, when you have a homeowner who very adamantly wants a spirit out of the house, if the spirit is benign and is not very strong, and it doesn't really have a huge foothold there, it will leave. So because he was the owner of the house besides me, and he told Joe that he wanted him to leave, Joe left. He actually did leave me. And that was a very, very unfortunate situation, because I could sense immediately that Joe was no longer there. And no, I haven't experienced Joe since, as far as I know. So I think within a night or two, I was lying in bed and I was home alone again. Like I said in the last episode, my husband worked shift work, so he worked a lot of nights, and his brother worked several jobs as well. And if he wasn't working, he was usually, you know, staying at his girlfriend's house or whatever. So I was home alone with the dogs, and we were upstairs asleep, and we sleep with the bedroom door closed. And in the middle of the night, I heard an ungodly bang. And it was just like if somebody was standing in the hallway and took a basketball, and it was a huge man who used all of his force to throw this ball at the door. It was the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life, and of course the door rattled, the whole room rattled, and the dog started freaking out. I was freaking out, I started crying, and it was probably one of the scariest things that I had ever experienced, because I knew that Joe was gone, and I knew that whatever this was that just did that was very negative. I could feel it in the house. The air would actually feel heavy and thick. It was thick with negativity. And the dog settled down after a few minutes, and I didn't leave the bedroom. I didn't go out. I didn't do anything. I literally sat in bed with the lights on for the rest of the night, watching like the Treehouse, which is a kids' TV channel, because I was so ungodly terrified. And I didn't say anything to my ex-husband after that happened, because I knew he was probably just going to discount it, make fun of me, probably cause a huge fight, the whole thing. But I kind of knew that it was paranormal, like I said, because I could feel the atmosphere change. And when I finally at some point ended up falling asleep and I woke up the next morning, my dog Keisha, like I said in the last episode, she had a habit of staring at the exact same spot on the wall in our bedroom. She was staring at this spot on the wall. So I tried to get her attention and everything, and shortly after this my ex-husband came home, and then I just went back to sleep. I believe at this point I was in university, and I either didn't have classes or I skipped my morning classes that day because I needed to go to sleep. And like I said, didn't say anything to my ex, but it was about a week later that he told me, he said, you know, a couple of nights ago, he said, I came home from shift, went to bed, you know, you were gone to work, and he said, the door was closed, and it was just like somebody took a ball or took their fists and banged on the door. And honestly, I almost fell over. I went weak in the knees. I got cold shivers because I hadn't told him what I had experienced. And he experienced the exact same thing, probably either the next night or a couple of nights later, sort of really early in the morning when I would have been gone to work. And I couldn't believe it, and I said, no way. I said, I had the exact same experience the night after you were making fun of Joe and told him to leave. I said, so now we don't have a protective spirit in the house. And of course, that caused a huge ruckus, and, you know, he just tried to discount the whole thing, but he wouldn't have said anything if he thought that it was just, you know, just kind of bullshit. So these are the types of things that we started experiencing. It wasn't small, just footsteps or whatever. And like I said in the previous episode, we started experiencing what I called a shapeshifter. There was one afternoon where I went up and got in the bath, My husband had just left for work. He left at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so I had finished classes for that day and wanted to get a bath, and he always used to leave through the patio door, our back door. So I was just going to go down and lock the patio door after I got out of the bathtub. And whenever I get a bath, like most people, their dogs will either lie in the hallway outside the bathroom or come into the room with them. And we had 2 Labrador retrievers. One was Keisha and one was Bo. Bo was our boy, and he was lying outside of the bathroom. So I was in the bath and I heard the patio door slide, which is a very distinctive sort of sound. And I heard my husband call out, "Bobo," which is what we used to call him. We called him Bobo. And my dog went down over the stairs, wagging his tail, and I heard him whining. So anyway, I was like, whatever. So I thought maybe he had forgotten his keys or something. It was literally moments after he had left, so I thought maybe he had forgotten his lunch or forgotten his keys and came back up to get them. Didn't know why he called out to the dog though. So I went downstairs and, you know, he wasn't there, so I locked the door and I called him on his cell phone and I said, "Why did you come back in the house?" He said, "I didn't." He was like, "I said goodbye and I left." And I said, "Well, I was in the bath and you opened the patio door and called out to Bo." He was like, "No, I didn't." And at this point we both believed that there was something in the house going on that was shape-shifting to sound like either him or I, so it could play games with us, I guess. And like I said, sometimes it would cause rifts, sometimes it would cause fights in the house. So after the next months to probably a year and a half, I think, in the house, things started to get really bad. So we were having this shapeshifter problem, especially when we were asleep. More so it would target myself than anybody else. So I was hardly sleeping. I had horrible insomnia because I knew as soon as the sun set and it was time for me to go to bed, I was going to start having experiences. So there was one night when I was upstairs and I was folding laundry on our bed. So I was just standing beside the bed folding laundry, and I got an ungodly stench of feces and decay. So I used to work as a paramedic and I know what death smells like. I know what dead bodies smell like. And when I was standing there, all I could smell was rot and fecal matter. It was the worst stench I had ever smelled in my entire life. My dogs weren't in the room, but I could feel that there was something there. Whenever that entity was in the room, it always got very dark and it always got very heavy. And I have this thing when there's a spirit around me, I'll have tingles that go from the top of my head and they'll just wash down over my entire body. And that's exactly what I was experiencing. So I got very scared because I knew if you have demonic activity in your home, that often it is associated with smells. So that really freaked me out. And I remember that first night that I had smelled it, I was standing there folding laundry and I was terrified. So after that first night that I had smelled the rot, I knew at this point that whatever negative entity was in the house was really starting to gather strength and things started to get very bad. So every night, pretty much every night, when I would go up and lie down in bed, I would still be awake. Like, there's no way that I was asleep and I was dreaming this. I was awake, I could move, there was no sleep paralysis, and I would smell that smell, and it was just like something had its face right here up against mine, and it would just be growling, and it was a half animalistic, half human growl. It would never say anything. It would just be right up in my face and would growl at me. And like I said, I could move. I wasn't asleep. I was fully awake, and I would never dare open my eyes. I never once decided that I was going to open my eyes and see what was there because I couldn't handle it. So this happened night after night after night after night, and I would lie there, you know, eventually after a while, after it went away and the atmosphere lightened, I would open my eyes, and most nights I would go to sleep with the lights on. So this kind of stuff would typically happen when I was home alone, or at least in the room alone. And there was one night when my husband's brother was home. He was out in our computer room, and I felt that heaviness come into the room. I could smell the smell of it, and I sensed that there was something there, but it wasn't in my face, it wasn't growling. And I very quickly, in kind of one motion, sat up and turned on the light, my bedside light, and there was someone, a woman, sitting on my floor, and she was rocking back and forth like this. And she, as soon as I turned the light on, she kind of looked at me, and that was one of the most terrifying things I had ever experienced, because the person that was looking at me was me as an older person. And I had never booked it out of a room so fast in my entire life. So I ran out of the room into the hallway, and my husband's brother was in the computer room, like I said, and he looked at me, and I was standing there in my tank top and underwear, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I didn't really know what to say, so of course I was like, yeah, I'm fine. So I went on downstairs, I got a glass of water, the whole thing, came back up, went back in our room, and just turned the TV on, kept the lights on, and it was another sleepless night, of course. And shortly after that, it had gotten to the point that it could actually, I only experienced it once, but it actually had gathered enough strength that it could light candles. So we had a really large entertainment center in our living room, and I had candles in these kind of wrought iron candle holders on top. And I had the candles lit hours and hours before, but had blown them out. And I was watching TV and, you know, just getting some snacks. I think I was working on a paper for school, and went in and got a refill on my Pepsi or whatever it was, came back out into the living room, and both candles were relit on top of the entertainment center. And like I said, it had been hours previously that I had these lit, so there's not like there was still sparks or smoke or anything there. And that happened once, maybe twice. So again, I knew that this thing was gathering strength, and it was showing me what kind of strength that it had. So I think the absolutely most terrifying thing I had experienced in that house was the night that my husband and I were lying in bed, and our bed was kind of in the center of the room, and on his side of the bed was the window, and on my side of the bed, a few feet over, was the wall, and it had a dresser on it. So it was one of those long dressers that has 6 drawers and a mirror. And we had gone to bed, and I knew things were negative. I could feel it. It was heavy in the room. And it was shortly after we went to bed. We weren't in bed very long, and it was pitch black. So it wasn't in the summertime or anything. It was totally pitch black. And I heard it. I heard a drawer sliding out of the dresser, and we heard a bang. So I clicked on the light, and his sock drawer had flown out of the dresser, and it had one of those safety stops on it, so you have to really work hard to be able to pull a dresser drawer out of there, because it had the safety stop. And it had flown about 3 feet across the room and was standing upwards this way. There were socks spread all over the floor, and it was about 1 foot away from my head. So I was completely frozen with shock. My ex-husband got up out of bed, walked over, picked up the drawer, struggled to get it back in, and came over and decided he was going to go back to sleep. He just laid down and he went completely back to sleep. And one thing that I forgot to mention, when the dresser drawer flew out of the dresser, our dog, Keisha, was looking at that same spot on the wall, and we had to clap our hands to try to get her attention, to get her to stop looking at this friggin' spot on the wall. I don't know what that dog was seeing, but she did it constantly. And it was kind of, especially on the days that we would have this paranormal activity happening. So that was absolutely the most terrifying thing I had happened. He tried to explain it away by saying one of the dogs opened it. It got caught on one of their collars and they hauled it out of the dresser. They hauled the drawer out of the dresser, which doesn't even make any sense. Even so, even if that did happen, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, it wouldn't have come 3 feet out of the dresser and landed upright right next to my head. So that didn't make any sense. But what absolutely gobsmacked me was he picked up the drawer, put it back in the dresser, came around the side of the bed and laid back down. He's like, hey, turn the light off. And I'm like, are we gonna talk about this? He's like, there's nothing to talk about, turn off the light. And I was terrified. I didn't want to go back to sleep. So at this point, I was just like, whatever, you go on back to sleep. I think I got a book and my little book light again, and I was just reading for the rest of the night. I didn't want to deal with it, and I was beyond terrified. So that's kind of most of, I think, what we experienced in that house. So it very quickly got very dark. So like I said, it started out kind of benign, and you know, you would hear the footsteps and all of that sort of normal haunted house activity, but then it got very, very bad. So there were 2 situations that I figured out sort of a few years later down the road that I knew probably was the situation that was going on. So the first thing is my theory on the man in the top hat. So my mom had been here visiting from Newfoundland, and she had been working on her family tree, her family history. And she brought it up with her, and we were looking it over and everything, and I thought it was super fascinating. She did a really, really good job. And she was telling me about her great-grandfather. I think, was it my great-grandfather or her great-grandfather? Can't remember. But she said when she was growing up, she always remembers him coming to their house, and he was always sort of in a 3-piece suit with a top hat. And she said he was a very large, sort of menacing looking man. And the thing that stuck out to me was that she would say if he was standing in a doorway, he would be taking up the entire doorway. And I couldn't believe it. I almost fell out of my chair, because I was like, that's exactly who I'm seeing in my dreams, who I'd been seeing in my dreams since I'd been about 2 years old, was this man, this huge menacing man in a top hat, who was trying to tell me something. And I dreamt about him frequently until I decided that I was going to separate from my ex-husband. And after our separation, I never dreamt about the man in the top hat ever again. So my theory is that this man in the top hat was my great-grandfather, and the message he was trying to relay to me was something that had to do with my marriage and the man that I chose that I was going to marry. Fortunately though, it was a bad situation, but I managed to get out of it. But like I said, he seems to be at peace ever since. He hasn't tried to relay any more messages to me. So all I can think is that that's exactly what he was trying to relay, was something about how I shouldn't be in that relationship with my ex-husband. And the other thing that I figured out was that the dark entity in the house. So my theory is that we weren't experiencing demonic activity, but we had a problem with a poltergeist. So the theory is that if you have a spiritual empath or someone who is highly, highly sensitive in a very negative situation that they're kind of stuck in, these sorts of people can manifest their negative energies into an external force. And sometimes it's even PK energy, where they can move things without kind of touching them. So poltergeists, people just think, oh yeah, poltergeists are just ghosts, and they're noisy ghosts is what the name comes from. But a lot of the times poltergeists can be formed by people who are psychic or spiritual empaths, like I said, who aren't able to deal with their own energies, and they end up putting it out into the atmosphere, and over time it got more and more and more negative, because this energy is pure negativity. It's someone's negativity that they can't handle themselves, and it was before I knew how to harness this sort of thing. Like I said, I was very young. I was still only 19 at the time. And we ended up with this sort of poltergeist that was made up of pure 100% negativity in the house. And that's why we were experiencing such bad levels of oppression and heaviness. It was causing fights. It was scaring people. And we had that gross, rotten smell. So after I had left my ex-husband, I haven't experienced a poltergeist since. So I've actually learned how to hone in my own energies through meditation and that sort of thing. But at the time, it was absolutely terrifying. And out of all of the paranormal experiences that I experienced in my entire life, even running into negative human spirits, that particular poltergeist that was made up of negativity was 100% terrifying. So there you guys go. That is everything that I have from the Haunted Victorian for this episode. And on the next episode, I would like to tell you more of a positive story. But until next time, everybody, sweet dreams.